The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the restaurant, painting faint golden lines on the polished wooden tables. The sound of clinking glasses and the faint hum of a coffee machine filled the air. It was just another day for the young waitress who moved quietly between the tables, balancing trays and forcing a polite smile for every guest. She had been working there for almost 2 years. It wasn't the kind of job she had dreamed of when she was younger, but it paid her rent and allowed her to survive in the city. Every day began before sunrise and ended long after the last guest had left. Her hands were often sore, her back ached, but she never complained. She just kept going. Her name was Lena. Most people barely noticed her. She wore a plain uniform like every other staff member and tied her hair back neatly so it wouldn't fall into her face. She wasn't loud or talkative, she preferred to keep to herself. Her coworkers often described her as quiet but reliable. If a customer needed something, she was always there. If another waiter was in trouble, she would help without being asked. No one at the restaurant really knew much about her. They assumed she was just another girl trying to make ends meet, working a simple job. But behind her calm, almost invisible presence, there was a story that none of them could have guessed. Years ago, before life became about paying bills and surviving, Lena had been someone else entirely. Her world once revolved around a piano. When she was younger, music was her language, her escape, her everything. She could spend hours practicing, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys, creating melodies that made her parents smile with pride. Her mother used to say that Lena didn't just play the piano, she spoke through it. Every emotion, every thought that words couldn't express, she poured into her music. She dreamed of performing on grand stages, of playing for audiences who would close their eyes and lose themselves in the sound. But dreams have a way of fading when life becomes difficult. Her father fell ill when she was still in school. The medical bills began to pile up and the family had to make hard choices. Music lessons were expensive, and there was no longer time to practice when she had to work part-time jobs to help her mother. Slowly, her dream slipped through her fingers. She stopped playing, telling herself it was temporary, but as months turned into years, the piano became a memory, a bittersweet one she avoided thinking about. Now, standing inside the restaurant, with an apron tied around her waist, she hardly recognized the person she used to be. The only time she allowed herself to remember was late at night, when the restaurant was empty, and she passed by the old upright piano sitting in the corner near the bar. It was mostly decorative, rarely used except during special events. Sometimes she would brush her fingers lightly over the keys when no one was looking, feeling that old spark flicker for a moment before she quickly walked away. That morning began like all the others. The manager was pacing around, checking the reservation list for the evening. A large celebration was planned that night. A private party for an important businessman and his wife. The entire staff was on edge because such events meant everything had to be perfect. "Make sure the tables are spotless," the manager said sharply. "And someone polish the silverware again. I want no fingerprints on anything." Lena nodded quietly, already wiping down the glasses. She didn't mind the pressure. She had learned long ago that staying calm made things easier for everyone. But as the day went on, she noticed how tense everyone else was. The chef shouted orders in the kitchen, waiters rushed around carrying stacks of plates, and the decorators were still setting up flowers and lights even as guests were expected to arrive soon. By the afternoon, the entire place was buzzing with nervous energy. The soft scent of roasted meat and spices filled the air. Elegant candles were placed on each table, and a soft glow spread through the dining hall. It was beautiful, almost magical, but Lena didn't have time to admire it. She was too busy refilling glasses, carrying trays, and helping with the setup. During her short break, she sat in the small staff room, sipping water and rubbing her sore hands. One of her co-workers, a cheerful young man who liked to tease everyone, leaned against the doorframe and grinned. "You look tired already, Lena. Big night ahead, huh?" She smiled faintly. "Yeah, I just hope everything goes smoothly." "Oh, it will," he said, "as long as the music guy shows up. You know how the boss gets when the entertainment cancels last minute." Lena laughed softly. "Let's hope that doesn't happen." She didn't know how ironic those words would soon become. As the evening approached, the restaurant filled with elegant guests in glittering dresses and dark suits. Laughter echoed across the hall as glasses of champagne clinked. The atmosphere was lively and luxurious, just as the businessman's wife had planned. Everything seemed perfect, until the manager received a phone call. His expression changed immediately. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath before hanging up. The room staff noticed his frustration right away. "What happened?" one of the waiters asked carefully. "The pianist just canceled," the manager said through clenched teeth. "Car trouble. He's stuck an hour away and won't make it." Everyone froze. The piano music was supposed to be the heart of the evening, filling the space with soft romantic melodies. Without it, the celebration would lose its charm. "What do we do now?" someone whispered. The manager rubbed his forehead. "I don't know. We can't just play random background tracks. It won't feel the same." There was a long silence. Then the cheerful coworker from earlier looked toward Lena with a mischievous grin. "Hey," he said. "Doesn't Lena play piano?" Lena froze, the glass she was holding almost slipping from her hand. "What? No, I mean not anymore," she said quickly, shaking her head. But the coworker continued teasing. "Come on, don't be shy. I heard you played for years. You could totally save the night." The manager turned to her, his eyes lighting up with desperate hope. "Wait, is that true?" "It was a long time ago," she said quietly. "I'm really not." "Please," he interrupted. "We need live music. Just a few pieces to keep the guests happy. You'd be helping everyone. You don't have to do much. Just play something soft." Lena looked around. Everyone was staring at her, waiting. She felt her stomach twist in knots. Her palms were sweating. She hadn't touched a piano properly in years. What if she made mistakes? What if she embarrassed herself in front of everyone? "I really don't think I can," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager sighed, clearly frustrated, but there was no time to argue. "Fine, I'll see if I can fix something else," he muttered, pulling out his phone again. As he walked away, Lena felt a mix of relief and guilt. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She was just a waitress. She wasn't supposed to perform. But deep down, something stirred in her chest, a faint ache she hadn't felt in a long time. She busied herself with her duties, trying to push the thought away. But as she passed the piano standing quietly in the corner, she couldn't help but glance at it. Its glossy surface reflected the warm candlelight, and for a moment she could almost hear the music she used to play. The first time she had performed in public was when she was 12. She remembered standing on stage, heart pounding, hands trembling. But once she started playing, everything disappeared, her fear, her doubt, the noise of the world. There was only her and the piano. Now she wondered if that feeling could ever come back. Her coworker nudged her playfully. "You should have seen the manager's face," he said. "He really thought you'd jump in and save the day." Lena forced a smile. "I'm not that brave." "Maybe not," he said with a wink, "but I bet you'd surprise everyone." As the night went on, Lena couldn't stop thinking about his words. She carried plates, refilled glasses, and smiled politely at the guests, but her mind kept drifting to the piano sitting alone. It seemed to be calling her, whispering softly, like an old friend she had abandoned long ago. When she had finished serving one of the tables, she noticed the manager talking to the businessman's wife, who looked slightly disappointed. The background playlist they had chosen wasn't working well. The guests were chatting loudly and the atmosphere felt off. The manager glanced toward Lena again. For a moment, their eyes met. He gave her a pleading look. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. The logical part of her screamed to say no, to stay in her lane, to avoid the humiliation. But another part of her, the part that had once believed in music, whispered something else. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe, after all these years, she was meant to touch the keys again. As she turned away from the tables, her hands trembling slightly, she whispered to herself, "It's just a few songs. What's the worst that could happen?" She didn't know that this one decision, this single step toward the piano, would change everything that followed. Because that night, when she finally sat down at the piano, The entire restaurant would witness something none of them would ever forget. But for now, she took a deep breath, trying to quiet the storm inside her, unaware that the world was just moments away from seeing the brilliance she had buried for so long. The music in the background played softly from a speaker, but it wasn't enough to fill the room. The guests were already starting to notice that something was missing. The clinking of glasses and low hum of conversation created a restless sound, and even though the restaurant looked beautiful, it didn't feel right. Something about the atmosphere seemed incomplete. Lena moved carefully between tables, holding a tray of champagne flutes. Her steps were steady, but her heart wasn't. Every time she passed by the piano, she could feel her pulse quicken. It sat there, untouched, elegant, and silent, waiting for someone to bring it to life. The businessman's wife looked disappointed. She had been so excited about having live piano music for their celebration. Her husband tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but she kept glancing at the empty corner where the piano stood. The manager noticed her expression and rubbed his temples in frustration. He had already called 3 different musicians, but none were available on such short notice. The only piano player in the building was Lena, and she had already turned him down once. He looked at her again, watching as she gracefully served the guests. There was something about the way she moved, calm, gentle, precise. Maybe she wasn't just a waitress. Maybe there was still something in her that hadn't completely faded away. When Lena returned to the counter to collect another tray, the manager stepped closer. "Listen," he said quietly so the guests wouldn't hear. "I know I asked earlier and you said no, but I'm asking again. We really need you, just for a few minutes. You'll save the night." Lena looked down, her hands gripping the tray tightly. "I haven't played in years," she said softly. "I might mess up. It would just make things worse." "You won't mess up," he said firmly. "I can tell. Please, just try. Nobody's expecting a concert, just something gentle, something nice. You know how important this event is." She hesitated. She wanted to say no again, but she saw the worry in his eyes. The entire staff was depending on her now, not just him. If she refused, the evening might fall apart, and somewhere inside her a faint voice whispered that maybe she needed this moment too. "I don't even know what to play," she said quietly. "Play whatever feels right." The manager replied, "You've got this." He gave her a small nod and walked away to attend to the guests, leaving her standing there with her thoughts swirling like a storm. Her coworker appeared again, smirking. "So, you're gonna do it, aren't you?" Lena shot him a nervous look. "I don't know." "Come on," he said with a grin. "You've got to. Everyone's counting on you. Besides, it'll be fun. When's the last time you did something crazy?" "Playing the piano isn't crazy," she said with a shaky laugh. "It will be if you blow everyone's minds," he replied and winked before walking off. Lena took a deep breath. Her hands felt cold, her stomach tight. She wiped her palms on her apron and looked toward the piano again. It felt like it was staring back at her. Every step she took toward it made her heart beat faster. When she finally reached the piano, the guests began to notice. A few turned their heads, curious. They whispered to each other, wondering what was happening. Some recognized her as the waitress who had been serving them earlier. Their expressions showed mild surprise. The businessman's wife smiled politely, thinking perhaps the restaurant had arranged a surprise performance. Lena sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she lifted the piano cover. The keys gleamed softly under the golden lights. She stared at them for a long time, trying to remember what it used to feel like. It was as if every part of her past was right there in front of her, waiting to be touched. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy black surface of the piano. She could see the same girl who once spent countless hours practicing, dreaming of big stages and bright lights. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. It had been so long. What if she couldn't do it anymore? What if the notes didn't come back? A small voice inside whispered, "Just start." She lifted her hands and pressed the first key. The sound was hesitant, soft, and uncertain. A few guests glanced at each other. But then slowly she began to remember. Her fingers moved from one note to the next, awkwardly at first, then with a little more confidence. The melody started to form, a piece she used to love when she was younger. It was one she had played for her mother many times, a song that carried both sadness and hope. At first, the restaurant noise didn't stop. People were still talking, laughing, drinking, but as the music grew clearer and smoother, something began to shift. Conversation softened. Heads turned. The clinking of glasses faded into silence. Her hands found their rhythm again. It was as if her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. The years she had spent away from the piano melted away with every note she played. The sound filled the room, soft, emotional, pure. The guests stopped eating. Some turned fully toward her. The businessman and his wife watched in amazement, their earlier disappointment forgotten. The manager stood near the counter, stunned, not daring to move in case it broke the spell. For the first time in years, Lena wasn't just a waitress. She was something else, something she had always been deep inside. Her fingers danced over the keys, her heart guiding them, her eyes half closed as the melody carried her away. She could feel everything she had kept hidden for so long coming to the surface. Her struggles, her loneliness, her lost dreams. All of it poured into the music. Every note was a story, every pause a breath of emotion. When the piece ended, the room was completely silent. The final note hung in the air like a soft whisper. Then slowly the applause began. It started with one pair of hands, then another, until the entire restaurant was clapping. Some people stood up. Others looked speechless, as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Lena blinked, her face flushing red. She didn't know what to do. She hadn't played for applause in years. She stood up awkwardly and gave a small, nervous smile. The businessman's wife approached her first, her eyes shining. "That was beautiful," she said warmly. "Truly beautiful. You play with so much feeling. Why are you working as a waitress?" Lena didn't know how to answer. She smiled shyly and looked down. "It's just, life got in the way, I guess." "Well," the woman said, "you should never stop playing. You have a gift," the guests murmured in agreement. Some of them came up to thank her, to tell her how much the music had moved them. The manager stood off to the side, speechless. He had never seen Lena like this before. To him, she had always been quiet, dependable, but this was something entirely different. When she finally returned to her station, her co-worker grinned from ear to ear. "See, what did I tell you? You just stole the whole show." Lena laughed softly, still blushing. "I didn't mean to, I just wanted to help." "Well, you did more than help," he said. "You made people feel something." "That's rare." She smiled but didn't reply. Inside, her heart was still racing. It had been so long since she felt that alive. As the night went on, the guests continued to talk about her performance. Some asked her to play again later in the evening. The manager, still amazed, approached her during a quiet moment and said, "You were incredible. I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell anyone you could play like that?" She shrugged, smiling shyly. "It's just something I used to do. I didn't think it mattered anymore." "It matters," he said sincerely. "You made this night unforgettable. I'm proud of you." His words warmed her more than she expected. She thanked him quietly and went back to work, but every time she passed the piano, she couldn't help smiling. When the evening finally came to an end and the guests began to leave, the businessman's wife stopped by the counter to say goodbye. She handed Lena a small card. "If you ever think about performing again," she said, "call this number. My friend organizes music events. You deserve to be heard." Lena took the card, surprised. "Thank you," she said softly. After the guests left, the restaurant was quiet again. The candles had burned low and the scent of food still lingered in the air. Lena helped clear the tables as usual, but something felt different. Her coworker noticed her distant expression. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" he asked. "About what?" "Playing again." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, I don't know, it felt nice." "It didn't just feel nice," he said. "It looked like you found yourself again up there." She didn't answer, but he was right. For years, she had been moving through life like a shadow, doing what she had to just to get by. But tonight reminded her that there was still a light inside her, something she thought had gone out long ago. After cleaning up, she walked past the piano one last time. She placed her hand on it gently, almost like saying goodbye to an old friend. But this time, she didn't walk away with sadness. She walked away with a quiet smile. Outside, the night air was cool. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. She stood for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling lighter than she had in years. The world around her was still the same, but inside something had changed. She didn't know what would happen next. Maybe she would call the number. Maybe she wouldn't. But she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't let her dream disappear again, and though she didn't realize it yet, her life was already beginning to change in ways she could never have imagined. The morning after the celebration felt strange for Lena. She woke up earlier than usual, even before her alarm rang. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of traffic outside her small apartment window. For a long time, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, still thinking about what had happened the night before. It didn't feel real. The memory of the applause, the looks on the guests' faces, the way the piano had come alive under her hands, it all kept replaying in her mind like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. She hadn't expected anything like that. She had only meant to help, to save the evening from falling apart. But instead, something inside her had woken up, something she had buried deep for years. When she finally got up and walked into the kitchen, she noticed the small card lying on the counter. It was the one the businessman's wife had given her. A simple cream-colored card with a name, a number, and the words "Music Events and Artists" printed neatly across it. She picked it up and turned it over in her hands. It felt heavier than it looked, like it carried a choice she wasn't ready to make. She wasn't sure if she had the courage to call. What would she even say? "Hi, I'm a waitress who accidentally performed at a party?" It sounded silly in her head. She placed the card back down and sighed. Maybe it was better to leave things as they were. Still, as she got dressed for work, she caught herself humming the same melody she had played the night before. For the first time in a long while, her reflection in the mirror didn't look so tired. There was a spark in her eyes, small but real. When she arrived at the restaurant, her co-workers were already talking about her. The moment she walked in, a few of them clapped playfully. "There she is, the star of last night," one of them said with a grin. Another laughed. "You should have seen the guests. They couldn't stop talking about you even after you left." Lena blushed. "Please don't make a big deal out of it. I just played a few songs." "Yeah, but you made people cry," one said. "That's not normal. You've got real talent." Even the manager came over with a rare smile. "I don't usually say this," he began, "but you were amazing." Everyone was impressed. "We got a lot of compliments because of you." "Thank you," she smiled shyly. "I'm glad it went well," he nodded. "Actually, I was thinking, maybe we could make this a regular thing. Live piano once a week. What do you say?" Her heart skipped. "You mean me? Play here?" "Why not?" he said. "You work here anyway, and the customers would love it." "Think about it." She hesitated. It was tempting, but also terrifying. Playing once was one thing. Doing it again regularly felt like too much pressure. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. He nodded. "No rush, but I think it's time people heard what you can do." The rest of the day passed slowly. The restaurant felt normal again, but inside her, nothing was normal anymore. Every sound reminded her of the piano, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversations, even the rhythmic noise of the coffee machine. Everything had a kind of rhythm now, like the world itself was nudging her to play again. That evening, when the last customers left and the lights were dimmed, Lena found herself standing near the piano once more. No one else was around. The floor smelled faintly of cleaning soap and the chairs were all stacked neatly. She sat down quietly, her hands resting on the keys. For a moment, she just listened to the silence. Then she began to play, softly, slowly, a melody she hadn't touched since her teenage years. The sound was raw and pure. It filled the empty restaurant with warmth. As she played, she thought about her mother. Her mother had always believed in her, even when things got hard. She used to sit beside the piano during practice, listening patiently to every mistake, every small improvement. "Keep going," she would always say. "Your music is special." But after her father's illness and the long struggle that followed, there had been no time for music. Her mother had worked extra hours and Lena had done the same. Dreams had to wait, until they eventually faded. When the last note faded into silence, Lena sat there quietly, her eyes glistening. She realized how much she had missed this feeling. The peace, the connection, the way everything else disappeared when she played. The next few days went by, but something inside her had changed. She found herself smiling more, speaking more gently, moving through her routines with a kind of calm that others noticed too. Her coworker teased her one afternoon. "You've been glowing since that night." "What happened? Someone give you a record deal or something?" She laughed. "Nothing like that, I just..." Remembered what makes me happy, I guess. He smiled knowingly. Then don't forget it again. That night when she got home, the business card was still on her counter. She picked it up again and stared at it for a long time. The number looked both inviting and frightening. Finally, after what felt like forever, she took out her phone and dialed. Her hands trembled slightly as she listened to the ring. A gentle voice answered. "Hello, music events and artists. How can I help you?" "Hi," Lena said nervously. My name is Lena. I was given your card by someone at a restaurant event last week." "Oh, of course," the voice said warmly. "Yes, she told me about you. Said you gave a beautiful performance. Are you interested in performing again?" Lena hesitated. "I'm not sure. I haven't played professionally in a long time. It was just an accident, really. That's how many great stories begin," the woman said with a laugh. "We sometimes organize small performances and local events, charity nights, things like that. No pressure, just places where people appreciate real music. Would you like to meet and talk about it?" Lena's heart was racing. "Maybe, yes. I'd like that." "Wonderful," the woman replied. "Come by our studio this weekend. We'll just have a chat and maybe hear you play a little. No judgment, I promise." When the call ended, Lena sat in silence for a long time, the phone still in her hand. She couldn't believe what she had just agreed to. Excitement and fear mixed together, making her stomach flutter. The weekend came faster than she expected. She almost canceled twice, thinking she wasn't ready. But something inside her refused to back down. She dressed simply and took a bus across town to the address on the card. The studio wasn't fancy. Just a small, cozy space with posters of old concerts on the walls and a grand piano in the center. The woman from the call greeted her with a friendly smile. She had kind eyes and an easy warmth that immediately put Lena at ease. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "We get so many musicians who are technically perfect, but very few who can make people feel something. That's what your friend said about you, that your music touched everyone." Lena smiled shyly. "I just play from the heart." "That's the best way," the woman said. "Would you like to try the piano?" Lena hesitated for only a moment before walking toward it. Her fingers brushed the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. She didn't overthink it, she just let the music come. When she finished, the woman looked genuinely moved. "You're special," she said softly. "You might not see it yet, but you have something real." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I wasn't sure I could still do this." "You can," the woman said. "And you should. Let's start small. I have an upcoming charity event at a community hall. It's not fancy, but it's warm and welcoming. Would you like to play a short set?" Lena hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes, I'd love to." As she left the studio that day, the city felt different. The sky looked brighter, the air fresher. She walked slowly, soaking it all in. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt alive with purpose. When she returned to the restaurant the next day, her co-worker noticed her bright expression. "You look happy," he said. "Something good happen?" She smiled. "Maybe. I have a chance to play at an event soon." He grinned. "See, I told you. You were never just a waitress." She laughed, shaking her head. "I still am. But maybe I'm something else too." That night after closing time, she sat at the restaurant piano again. This time when she played, she didn't feel nervous. She felt free. The notes flowed effortlessly, filling the quiet space with beauty. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the windows, and for a moment, she imagined herself performing in a grand hall. The crowd silent, every note echoing through the air. The dream no longer felt impossible. It felt close and like something waiting for her. Just around the corner, and though she didn't know it yet, her small act of courage that night, the decision to say yes, would open doors she never believed she'd walk through. Because sometimes, life gives you a second chance exactly when you least expect it. The night of the charity event arrived faster than Lena had expected. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding her breath until the evening finally came, and she was standing in front of the old community hall, staring up at the small building that would be the stage for her first public performance in years. She hadn't told anyone at the restaurant. It was a small event, nothing fancy, and she wasn't sure how it would go. It didn't feel like a big deal, but to her it felt huge. It was the first time in a long time that she had taken a step toward something she truly wanted. She wasn't nervous. She was terrified. The hall was much smaller than she had imagined, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and walls that had seen better days. But there was something warm about it, something that made her feel like it didn't matter how old or run down the building was. The people inside were what mattered. When she walked in, the room was filled with a low hum of conversation, a mix of voices chatting, laughing, and the clinking of glasses. The guests were gathered around tables, some with plates of food, others with drinks in hand. But as soon as she entered, a few people turned their heads. The woman who had invited her, the event organizer, saw her and smiled brightly. "Lena, you made it!" "I'm so glad." Lena smiled back, though her stomach was turning in knots. "Thanks for having me." "You're going to be great," she said, giving Lena a gentle squeeze on the arm. "Don't worry. Just play what you feel." That was easier said than done. Lena walked past the tables, each step feeling heavier than the last. She could hear snippets of conversation as she passed, people talking about the food, the event, the auction. But she was only focused on the piano, which sat in the corner of the room. It looked almost out of place, shiny and pristine amidst the casual atmosphere of the hall. When she reached the piano, she was relieved to find that it wasn't as intimidating as she thought it would be. The moment she sat down, the weight in her chest eased just a little. She ran her fingers over the smooth keys and closed her eyes for a moment. Just play what you feel. The phrase echoed in her mind. She had no set list, no plans. She didn't even know exactly what she was going to play. She just knew she had to do this, to remind herself that this was still who she was, no matter how long it had been. The room fell silent when she touched the first key. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but soon the guests stopped talking and started turning their heads. The soft, familiar sound of the piano filled the air, and Lena's fingers moved as if they remembered the music more clearly than she did. She started with a simple melody, the same one she had played the other night. The room wasn't quiet anymore. The conversations had stopped, and the guests now watched her with interest. It wasn't a large crowd, but each person's eyes were focused on her. She felt her hands begin to move more confidently, her heart slowly matching the rhythm of the music. For the first time that evening, she felt herself relax. The longer she played, the more the music seemed to take on a life of its own. She didn't think about the guests or the event or anything else. She just let the notes flow, one after another, filling the room with something rich and deep. As the song came to an end, she hesitated for a moment. A soft, almost imperceptible applause started. People clapped quietly, unsure of how to react. Lena didn't stop. She simply began another piece, this time more intricate, something that tested her skills a little more. She had always loved the challenge of playing fast, complicated pieces, and the feel of her fingers dancing across the keys was a comfort, a reminder that this was who she truly was. The applause grew louder after that second piece, and Lena allowed herself a small smile. But the moment she stopped playing, she could feel the weight of the world settle back on her shoulders. She stood up from the piano and looked at the small crowd in front of her. They were all watching her, some with wide eyes, others with soft smiles. The woman who had invited her walked over and gave her a heartfelt hug. "You were incredible," she said. The guests loved it. "They're all talking about you." Lena couldn't believe it. She had gone into this expecting nothing more than a few polite claps, but now she was receiving praise, and it felt surreal. As the event continued, she found herself drifting between the guests, serving drinks and talking casually. But it was different now. They looked at her differently. The way they spoke to her was different, like they knew she was someone special. At one point, a man approached her with a kind smile. He was older, maybe in his 50s, wearing a well-tailored suit. He introduced himself as a local businessman, and before Lena could even say anything, he was asking her about her piano playing. "I have to say," he started, "I don't think I've ever heard such an emotional performance at one of these events. You have a rare gift, miss. You really should consider pursuing this more seriously." Lena didn't know how to respond. She could feel the heat in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. "It's just a hobby, really." "Really?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Well, you've certainly got more than just a hobby. Have you thought about playing for larger events? Maybe even for some of my corporate gatherings?" Lena blinked in surprise. She had never considered performing professionally, not seriously anyway. But hearing him speak with such confidence made her wonder. I've never thought about it that way, she said softly. Think about it, he said with a smile. You'd be surprised at how much demand there is for a pianist with your kind of soul. I can put you in touch with people. Lena could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was this really happening? She had spent so many years running from this part of her life, and now it was knocking on her door, and she didn't know if she was ready to answer. But as the night went on, one conversation led to another. People kept approaching her, each one expressing admiration for her music. Some talked about future gigs, others simply praised her talent. By the end of the evening, she was overwhelmed. She had never imagined that something as simple as playing the piano for a few people could lead to such attention. But there was one thing that was clear. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the waitress. She was someone who had something to offer. After the event, as Lena was packing up her things and getting ready to leave, the event organizer caught up with her. You were fantastic tonight, she said, giving her a warm smile. I knew you had it in you, and I think the world is ready for you. Lena smiled back, but the words caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what the world meant for her yet, but she did know one thing: the music was still with her, and it had never felt more alive. The next day, when Lena arrived at the restaurant, she couldn't shake the feeling of what had happened. It felt like everything was different, even though nothing had truly changed. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the leap, but she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. Her coworker noticed her thoughtful expression. What's going on? He asked. I think I might actually try this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I can make music a bigger part of my life. His eyes lit up. I knew you'd get there. I told you, you're not just a waitress. You're a musician. Lena laughed softly, but it felt good to hear it. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't just one thing. Maybe she could be both. The business card was still on her desk. The number she had been too afraid to call, now something she looked at with a different kind of hope. And though she didn't know exactly what the future held, she knew that for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. The weeks that followed the charity event were a whirlwind for Lena. The offers kept coming, each one more tempting than the last. People from all walks of life, business owners, event planners, even some local artists, were reaching out to her. They all wanted her to play at their events, whether it was a small gathering or a larger, more formal affair. For the first time in years, Lena felt like she was finally being seen, not just as a waitress, but as someone with a talent worth sharing. Despite the growing excitement, doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. Every time she picked up the phone to accept an invitation, a wave of anxiety washed over her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her music didn't touch people the way it had at that small event? Could she really do this on a bigger scale? But every time she tried to talk herself out of it, she remembered the way it felt to play that first night. She remembered the joy in the guests' faces, the way the music had flowed out of her without hesitation, as though it was always meant to be. Lena couldn't ignore it any longer. She knew that this was her chance to do something she had always dreamed of. It wasn't going to be easy, but if she didn't try now, when would she ever? One evening, as she was finishing her shift at the restaurant, the manager called her into his office. Lena, I've been meaning to talk to you about something, he said, his usual stern tone softening a little. I've seen the way things have changed for you since that night. You've been glowing, and honestly, I think it's time you take a step back from here. Lena blinked, surprised by the comment. Take a step back? From here? Yeah, he said. You've got something special. I can see it, and I think it's time you make a choice. You're ready for more than serving food and drinks. If you want to pursue music, this is your chance. I won't hold you back. Lena's heart skipped. The restaurant had been her home for so long, a place where she felt comfortable and safe. But now she was being asked to leave that comfort behind and step into something uncertain. It was terrifying, but also exciting. I don't know if I'm ready to leave yet, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to leave right now, he reassured her. But you should start thinking about it. You deserve to have your own stage. Don't settle for this forever. You're meant for more. The conversation stayed with her long after she left for the night. The idea of walking away from the familiar was hard, but his words echoed in her head. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of her own potential. The following weekend, Lena took the first real step toward making music her life. She called the event organizer who had first brought her to that charity night and asked her if she could play at an upcoming event. The woman was thrilled to hear from her. Of course, we're actually planning a much bigger charity concert next month. It's going to be held at the convention center, and we're expecting a crowd of over 500 people. Would you be interested in performing? Lena's breath caught in her throat. 500 people? It was far more than she had ever imagined. But something inside her said, this is it. This is what you've been waiting for. Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly but strong. I'll do it. The moment she agreed, she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. What had she just signed up for? She had no idea what a crowd of 500 would be like or how she would handle the pressure, but as the days passed, the initial fear began to fade. She practiced every day, her fingers moving over the keys with more confidence. She had to trust herself. She had to trust the music. As the concert day approached, Lena's nerves began to build again. She had played in small venues before, but this was different. The stage was enormous, and the lights would be brighter than anything she had ever experienced. The idea of standing in front of so many people made her stomach twist in knots. But then, the night before the concert, something unexpected happened. Lena received a message from an old friend, a former piano teacher who had always believed in her. The message was simple. I heard about the concert tomorrow. I'm so proud of you, Lena. I know you'll shine. The message brought tears to her eyes. It had been years since they had spoken, and yet here she was thinking of her, supporting her. It reminded Lena of the days when she was just a girl with a dream. Her teacher's belief in her had never wavered, even when she had. The next morning, as Lena stood backstage, waiting for her turn to perform, she thought back to that moment. She wasn't just playing for the people in the room. She was playing for herself. She was playing for that young girl who once dreamed of sharing her music with the world. When she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight hit her, and for a brief moment, the world went silent. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano. The familiar weight of the keys beneath her fingers gave her comfort. The nerves were still there, but she had learned to use them, to transform them into energy. She started playing, and the music flowed through her effortlessly. It was as if the audience wasn't even there. She could hear the music, feel the music, and for a few minutes nothing else mattered. The sound of the piano filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt completely at peace. She wasn't just performing. She was sharing a part of herself, a piece of her soul, with every person in the audience. When she finished the last note, the room fell silent for a moment, and then the applause erupted. Lena couldn't believe it. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine, heartfelt appreciation. She stood there, taking it in, a smile spreading across her face. She had done it. She had taken the leap, and it had paid off. After the performance, people came up to her, praising her for the emotion in her music. Some offered to help her find more gigs. Others simply wanted to shake her hand and tell her how moved they were by her performance. One man in particular approached her. He was the same businessman from the charity event, the one who had first recognized her talent. I'm glad I didn't miss this, he said, a smile in his eyes. You've got something rare, Lena, you've got real soul, and I think the world needs more of it. She smiled at him, her heart full. Thank you. I'm just getting started. Later that evening, as she walked off the stage and into the quiet backstage area, Lena felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. She had done it. She had faced her fear and stepped into the unknown, and it had been worth it. From that night on, Lena became more than just a waitress. She became an artist, someone who touched people's hearts with her music. She started booking more performances, and soon she was playing at larger venues, receiving offers from across the city. But she never forgot where it all began. The small community hall, the people who believed in her when she hadn't believed in herself. She always carried that memory with her, knowing that her journey was just beginning. And as she stood at the piano in a crowded theater one evening, with the audience eagerly waiting for her to play, Lena realized that she wasn't just living her dream. She was creating a new one note at a time. Because sometimes the hardest step is the first one, but once you take it, the world opens up in ways you never imagined.